Hello, everybody. Welcome to the last session of this wonderful conference. I would like to welcome and introduce retired Lieutenant General John Glad Castellaw, founder and chief executive of Farm Space Systems, a provider of aerial data collection, management, and equipment. During a 36-year career, he led the Marines around the world, ashore and afloat, flew over 24 different aircraft, served on the UN staff during the siege of Sarajevo, planned and executed humanitarian operations in Asia, Africa, and Europe, commanded the American forces in stability and security operations in East Timor, and was chief of staff for the US Central Command during the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. His final assignments, he's a busy guy, were in the Pentagon, where he oversaw Marine aviation and the Marine Corps budget. A recognized national security expert, he has testified before a Senate Committee on Food Security and is affiliated with several Washington-based think tanks, providing expertise on the impacts of climate, food, energy, and security. He frequently travels overseas, recently visiting Cuba, Israel, Qatar, the Central African Republic, Rwanda, and Australia. And that's a perfect segue to his subject about food insecurity and population growth. So Glad, take it away.
Thank you. Brady, am I going to share my screen? Is that the screen for my presentation?
You should be able to, yeah.
Let me see if I can make this happen. There we go. Simply amazing. Well, thank you very much, Peter. I appreciate the introduction and the opportunity to be here today. You know, there are three great loves in my life: farming, the Marines, and the woman who has allowed me to share her life for the last 50 years. And when I graduated from the University of Tennessee at Martin, I had a degree in agriculture, a commission in the Marine Corps, and her as my new wife. And I made her the first promise that I broke to her, and that was, hey, honey, 3 years and we're back on the farm. We went into the Marine Corps, and in that 36 years, she moved us 25 times around the world. The last move was back here to the farm, family farm, that I'm the third generation on in Crockett County, Tennessee. So finally, promise kept. I did not know, you know, 50 years ago that all three of them would meld into what's been the majority of my focus during my career, both in the Marine Corps and out. But I spent the majority of my time in the Corps, not in combat operations, but in humanitarian operations. I was involved in recovery operations in the Philippines after typhoons. I coordinated shipment of food and medicine to the former Soviet Union after the wall came down and the Soviet Union disintegrated. I led U.S. forces restoring peace and security in East Timor. I worked with supporting the repatriation of Angolan rebels and families after that civil war. Planned for evacuation of civilians in Chad, and I coordinated food drops in Bosnia. And what this did, as I participated in those operations, it allowed me to see the interplay with conflict and how that conflict over food eventually can threaten our own country's national security interest. And then the addition of climate change to that formula came to me when I was in Iraq. I was standing on the Haditha Dam in western Iraq, and I was watching, looking down the valley of the river, the Euphrates there, and it was like a painting in my Sunday school classroom at Barker's Chapel Baptist Church, a river with greenery on each side, and I was watching a Marine convoy come back into the secure area, and all of a sudden, one of the biggest explosions I've ever seen went off when an improvised explosive device was targeted on the convoy. And that led me to look deeper into, what that convoy was doing, and like 70% of others in the area was carrying fuel. And that's where the majority of our casualties occurred, in those convoys, when we were tied, as my friend Jim Mattis said, to the tether of fuel. And then I went and looked deeper, and I saw the impact that producing and using that fossil energy had on our environment, and how it was contributing to conflict through food insecurity, migration, and other factors that we'll talk a little bit about here. And then when I left the Marine Corps, I joined a company that had a 10,000-acre farming operation. And I had farmed in the 1960s when it was the old-fashioned way. And then I was introduced to precision agriculture and regenerative agriculture. And I saw how it was possible to reduce the amount of energy that we used. And I was listening to somebody who was talking about, I think you had a session on carbon, how soil can serve as a repository for taking carbon out of the air by using cover crops and transitioning to tillage practices that reduces the amount of disturbance of the soil and so forth. And that led me also to affiliate with a number of organizations that were involved in climate change and the impacts. I'm sit on the advisory board of the Center for Climate and Security and the American Security Project, and I'm also on the board for CNFA, which has contracts with USAID, and that allows me to, on a daily basis, to see the impact of food insecurity and how we can help deal and ameliorate that situation. As I look back, and over the past 30 years, we've done a pretty good job on food security. And I really got to understand a little bit about how we had first got it wrong, and then we're doing a better job. I had the opportunity to represent the U.S. At the inauguration of the President of the Federated Republic of Micronesia. That was a set of islands that during World War II had been occupied by the Japanese and combat in that area. And I was talking to the senior diplomat there, and we started talking about some of the issues that country had. And one of those issues is a terrible obesity situation. And you go into the grocery store, and there's just rows and rows and shelves of Spam and food like that has contributed to a bad health situation with diabetes and so forth. And she looked at me and said, hey, when the Japanese occupied this area, these islands, they taught them how to fish and grow rice. When we came in, we taught them how to open cans. But we have done better than that as we came along. And then again, over the last 30 years, we saw a reduction in world hunger, in great part because of some of the actions we were taking about. And then there also, we have civilian organizations that contributed to that 30-year period. One of them, the American Soybean Association. One of its project is in West Africa and Ghana, where they're helping create and improve the poultry industry so that more protein can be introduced into the diets of the people in that country, and provide a greater health environment for those folks, plus increase the economic security of them. And so, you know, actions like what we've done with USAID and what we did independently, again, help with the hunger. But within the last 4 years, we've started seeing a downward trend. And one of the things you can do, if you look at a map where we've got conflict around the world, and it's a pretty interesting band that goes around on either side of the equator. And then when you put a map of where we expect, for instance, to have some of the most large increases in temperatures, then you look and you see that that map, those two maps pretty well coincide, particularly in Africa. And then you know what you're seeing is that, you know, heat waves are increasing fivefold in places like Greece. Lack of moisture is destroying farmland in Central America. Diseases are spreading at a faster rate in places like Nigeria. And then around the world, old folks like me are seeing increase in the numbers of us that are killed by extreme heat. In fact, more than some of the other weather events, including hurricanes. So that shows us where the issues are and where the climate and conflicts overlap. So in the last 4 years, you know, we've increased the number of people that go to bed hungry every night to over 800 million. We've got another 100 million or so that are on the edge of starvation. And then on top of that, we've got the results or the potential impact of the pandemic, which now probably will push the number of people in food insecurity to over 1 billion. And you add another factor into this. World population is going to grow another 2.5 billion by 2050. But the problem is also going to be, it's going to be in an area where we've already got problems with food insecurity and also with that increase in the impacts of climate change. That math is not just about the total number of people, but it's also about some of the larger population groups, particularly the younger folks that are vulnerable when chaos exists, jobs are not there, to extremism. And particularly in Africa, you know, 200 million people between the ages of 15 and 24, and that number is going to double in the next 30 years. High unemployment rate, all are contributors to instability. Threats to food. Although climate impacts alone do not create instability, expected climate changes will increase risk to such things as food security, sources of food. Populations who are at the greatest risk to food security are those that have a high dependency on agriculture and no alternative sources of income such as exist in Africa. African populations depend mainly on agriculture. I was in Rwanda a year or so ago. 90% of the country's population are involved in agriculture. Agriculture and fisheries are very vulnerable to climate change. One of the organizations that I'm associated with, the Center for Climate and Security, projects increased water scarcity linked to variations in rainfall patterns will have a negative impact on agricultural yields of crops that are dependent on rainfall, including corn, wheat, millet, sorghum. Combined with demographic data, which predict a substantial increase in population, these developments could fuel massive population migrations. In addition, simultaneous crop failures in the world's major producing basins could lead to excessive speculation of restrictions on international markets and hunger rats. Advances in climate science and technology are making it possible to more accurately forecast Africa's long-term climate projections. The temperature map we saw earlier reflects rising temperatures above the global average, decreased rainfall in north, south, and west, and with increased rainfall in the east, variability will increase, making long-term forecasts more difficult. Sea levels will rise, heavy rainfall events will occur. All these are threats to the food sources, increasing insecurity. When we look at existing conflicts, what we see is that climate change is not a direct instigator of conflicts. Most of the conflicts that we deal with are long-term, historical, produced by differences in ethnic and religious groups with various historical reasons for conflict, but they do contribute to what the military calls a threat multiplier, climate change does. I think the Department of Defense, the military, is well aware of this and is acting against it. Chuck Hagel, who was Secretary of Defense in the last administration, is quoted as saying, rising global temperatures, changing precipitation and patterns, climbing sea levels, and more extreme weather events will intensify the challenges of global instability, hunger, poverty, and conflict. And they will likely lead to food and water shortages, pandemic disease, disputes over waters and resources, and destruction by natural disasters in the region across the globe. And again, he sees those as aggravating the existing conflicts. The impact is with the effect of COVID-19 and climate change, over 1 billion people may be impacted by food insecurity, driving mass migration in the Middle East, Africa, and Southwest Asia. And these migrations will destabilize neighboring populations, accelerate conflict, and threaten our own security by disrupting economic, military, and diplomatic relationships. I want to talk about, and then stop for questions, the Lake Chad Basin. I've been going there since the 1990s. I went there to set up a situation where we were, thought we might have to evacuate civilians because of a potential coup underway. Historic conflict between fishermen on the lakes, herdsmen, nomadic herdsmen, and farmers, primarily in the south, intensified as the lake dried up. And it was really interesting. When I first went there in the 90s, as you flew across the lake, you're starting to see the sand dunes rise out of it. And when I went back a year or so ago, you know, the lake itself is just a remnant of what it used to be. And so now you have the farmers and the herdsmen and the fishermen all competing for this greatly reduced resource, water. And that results in conflicts, actually armed conflicts between these individuals. And it produces an environment, particularly since most of the region is ungoverned by the nations that own it, opportunity for organizations such as Boko Haram to generate and to rob the people, tax them or whatever in order to fund their own operations, which eventually could threaten our own security. I think we've got about 10 minutes left, so I'm going to stop right here and turn it back to you, Peter, for any kind of questions that we might have.
All right, I've got one question myself, and then we do have other questions. The civil war in Syria is said to be catalyzed by climate change, not the cause. They were self-sufficient agriculturally, with water fed by their fossil water, their aquifers, and they dried them out, and then they got an historic drought. And the unrest is said to have been there against the Assads, but as long as the people were being fed, it just sort of stayed below the surface. When the farms failed, first by the farmers and then other people, the farmers couldn't farm, people weren't being fed, and the Civil War broke out. Would you see this as a harbinger, both in terms of internal unrest and climate migrations for what could and will be happening in critical parts of the world, particularly the Middle East as well?
Sure, and also in Central America and Honduras and other places where you're having the weather destroy the farming operations. You're starting to see migrations. That's part of what is generating the movement of people from Central America through Mexico to the United States. Syria is one of the first canaries in the coal mine in terms of the impact of climate change. You get other places in Central Asia where climate change and mismanagement of the water supplies are generating conflict and within domestically and introducing migration of those people. Other locations like in Bangladesh, where the increased intensity of storms at a low level country are causing weather's causing destruction of the infrastructure and the people's livelihood, which is also generating migration. So as you look around, no place on the world is immune to it. There are just some that are worse than others.
One question that actually with a follow-up that has come up is, what are the most effective means we can reach out to veterans in rural Tennessee and effectively make the case to them that mitigating climate change is a vital national security goal that warrants their time and attention? And then the follow-up to that is now as well as after the November election.
Well, right now, one of the things that as I looked at the people on the screen, most of us are older folks. The younger ones, by and large, are much better at understanding what's going on. And we also are creating programs that educate the veterans that are coming out on some projects that impact regenerative agriculture, precision agriculture. When I got out, I was always a John Deere green guy, and the company I was working for had red equipment. And so I set up a demonstration where we brought in John Deere equipment, and I got into one of the sprayers, and it was like getting into the cockpit of my aircraft that I flew, except it had more computing power, automatic steer, and the cab links and so forth. And so we have a program funded by the U.S. Department of Agriculture that's centered with AgriCenter International in Memphis, but it also includes the University of Tennessee Institute of Agriculture, where we are bringing veterans in, and we are taking the skills that they learn, GPS, other advanced technology, and orienting those skills toward agriculture to support precision agriculture, which is just the right amount of the right stuff at the right place at the right time to reduce the amount of pesticides you use, the amount of energy, to reduce soil disturbance, to include cover crops in it. And so, we are going to be able to influence the coming generation and wrapping around a core of veterans that are coming out about what this will do for our environment, for our economy, because it will also support the carbon market. So yes, there are things that are being done, and the waves are increasing on moving in that direction.
Here's another one that CCL's mission is to create the political will for a livable world. And we do that by lobbying our members of Congress. What's the best way for us to connect with veterans to join our lobby delegations? And the follow-up was, would you be willing to join one of our teams in December for a virtual lobby visit?
Well, I'm involved with a number of organizations, and this is not the first CCL event that I participated in. And I've supported you in the DC area. I'm participating in lobbying in Congress. I'm involved with also another organization called Environmental Entrepreneurs, E2, which has a heavy lobbying effort in DC. So when we have opportunities to press this case, we do so. And there is a whole network of veterans who are involved in this type. There's the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition, USGLC, that has an organization of veterans that are focused on this. The American Security Project, also the Truman Project. So there's a lot of effort around there to take veterans and to use them with their credibility for these issues to press.
Here's another one, that human beings have for 95% of our time on Earth followed food across the continents. Where will the millions with no choice migrate to? And the corollary to that is the areas that are probably most affected by sea level rise and warming, areas in the Middle East and Southeast Asia, are also very heavily Muslim, and with political conditions that may change, but as exist in much of the world, people who are forced to migrate may not have places to migrate to.
Well, that's the issue. I mean, when you migrate and people don't want you to migrate, you generate conflict. So what we need is a balanced approach, and there's folks out there in Congress that are supporting our engagement overseas. Even Walmart and a lot of the big companies, Cargill, they've got projects going on in a lot of those locations to try to generate more economic developments, so that what's the most important thing you do in a family? You provide for the family. So you develop the infrastructure that will allow them to do it. I talked about the Soybean Association and what they're doing with poultry in Ghana. There are other efforts underway. I visited the efforts we had in Rwanda to do the same thing, is to help them build infrastructure. As I said before, we taught them to open cans. Now we're helping create the infrastructure so that they can be sustainable in feeding that people. And we need to have a bipartisan approach in Congress. The Rubio legislation, the legislation that's in the House addressing climate change, the legislation in support of USAID. And the reason, that we need to do all of this is that we're getting too used to defaulting to the military. The most precious resource we have in the United States is the blood of the men and women who serve. That should be the last resource that we spend on conflict. We should be doing this other stuff, engagement, soft power, so that we don't have to send our men and women to war. And the rural area needs to be even more soft 40% of those who serve, 40% who serve in the U.S. military come from the rural areas, disproportionately.
Glad you spoke at one point about a great increase in food supply between 1990 and 2020. I suspect that that was in part a continuation of what's been called the Green Revolution that has created a whole lot more food, but also at the expense of driving people industrializing agriculture, driving people off of small farms, and greatly increasing the use of fossil fuels in agriculture. Kind of a sensitive question, but what do you think about that?
Well, you know, as I said, with my work with CNFA, went to Rwanda this last year, and had been in place like Djibouti, and I'll use Djibouti as an example. The economic structure there is based on goats. You go out to a village, and you know, the goat herds provides the wealth for it. And then also water is scarce, and so you may have one well and it's 5 miles from town. Okay, so you have a situation where the women are responsible for water, so they walk 5 miles twice a day to get water. You have scrawny goats. So what do? Well, what we did with the military, and this should be you know, an example for other organizations for civilians, is we sent a team composed of a well drilling detachment and a veterinarian detachment. They went in and they drilled a well closer to town, so the women didn't have to walk as far. And you know, when mama is happy, everybody's happy, and when she's not, everybody's unhappy. So that made her happy, and that increased the quality of life. You vaccinated the goats. The goats were healthier. They produced more offspring. They produced more milk. They increased the wealth of the community, and so that increased the confidence in the government. And so what you did is get a strengthening of the governance and of the company, and the less likely of the opportunity for bad guys and girls to gain a foothold. So you know, this is not an easy subject. It requires a lot of effort. There's no simple solution, but you got to work it, you know, in a collaborative way.
I think we need to wrap up, everyone. I think the closing is supposed to start in 2 minutes. So thank you so much, Glad and Peter, for moderating.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
And you're welcome. I think we're on this line for the closing, right, Tom?
That's right. Yep. So everybody will be coming back to this line next 2 minutes, and we'll close on out. But thank you so much, Glad. It's just a pleasure hearing from you, and thanks everybody who was able to participate. We're gonna close on out here in just a couple of minutes. So if you need to, take a quick break, and we'll be right back here at 3:20.